So good afternoon. Welcome to day 3 of reInvent. My name is Jonathan Allen. I am an AWS Enterprise Strategist, and this is ENT205, executing a large-scale migration to AWS. Let's just sort of fast forward. There was a repeat of this session on Monday. This is now the second session. Just going into the agenda, I'm going to cover, obviously, some of the high-level business drivers, but overall, this session is actually focused on the how, not the why. I'm going to talk about setting yourself up for success and some of the common things we've learnt around the planet, going through thousands of migrations. I'm going to deep dive a little bit into the 7 R's for application migrations and some of the technical elements and best practices for patterns we see in that regard. Then Nike are going to come and share their migration story on stage. And then we're going to go through the Migration Acceleration Program in some detail. So, business drivers for migration. We really see a massive number of different reasons from our enterprise customers around the world for why they want to migrate. Everything from wanting to get to that agility and developer productivity improvements, through to changes in outsourcing contracts, facilities, leases expiring, improved security. The bar, obviously, for security is raising every single day. Through to costs, obviously wanting to get costs out of those data centers. Through to talent. A lot of the talent we see from the graduates leaving universities and colleges have worked with cloud for a number of years and actually want to work for employers that are cloud native. And obviously, going global quickly is also a really strong factor. People want to build their infrastructure and applications and actually use common APIs around the world consistently to provision that infrastructure. But by far, the most common use case we see for mass migrations is obviously unlocking these savings and rapidly positioning yourself for modernization. And we truly have thousands of customers migrating. I'm sure you saw Andy's keynote this morning where he covered a couple of them in detail. Everything from Enel through to Atlassian, through to my own alma mater, Capital One. I've actually been with AWS for going on 2 years now, but in a previous life, I was actually in Capital One for 17 years as a senior director and divisional CTO and helped lead the early adoption for Capital One in the UK into AWS. And if you look at some of the benefits that these enterprises are getting from migrating, they're truly profound. You know, if you take a look at Enel on this screen, migrating 5,500 instances in 9 months, reducing their storage costs by 50% and compute costs by 20%. These are profound changes that are positively impacting their business. Through to Coca-Cola, who obviously migrated 600 workloads to AWS in just 14 months. Now, over the last 2 years, I've had the privilege of personally working with over 170 different customers around the world that are transforming their business with AWS and working on migrations. And it can actually be a little bit intimidating when you're faced with thousands of servers, hundreds or thousands of application workloads. It can feel a little bit overwhelming. And this is a really common question that I get. So with the benefit of hindsight from that collective learnings, both from my own personal experience as a customer, but from all those customers we've worked with, and the thousands of customers that AWS have worked with, how can we go really fast but safely? And I want to share some of the most powerful lessons that we've seen around the planet with you today. Now, first of all, the most powerful lesson, and one that has the most profound effect on positive change for migrations, is when a single-threaded leader declares a bold goal for your organization to migrate. We see this time and time again being the primary driving force for effective transformations. And obviously, when this goal is linked to your business's goals themselves. And typically, from my own personal experience in Capital One, When Rob Alexander, the global CIO, stood on stage at reInvent in 2015 and really announced to the audience and the world that Capital One was moving from 8 data centers to 3 by the end of 2018, it removed massive amounts of ambiguity inside the organization. And we see the same from the likes of Vanel, where Fabio set a very similar goal. So time and time again, we see this being hugely important. And these leaders then obviously have to bring a holistic group of stakeholders in your business together to make sure across the dimensions of people, process, and technology that there's a consistent understanding of moving to AWS. There can be a natural fear of the unknown. So typically, best practice, we see an executive steering group coming together that has procurement folks, the legal folks in there. Obviously, the Chief Information Security Officer or a direct report. Security is job zero for us all. Through to the finance officer. If you're moving away from a traditional CapEx-intensive business now to an OpEx, it can be very liberating, but your finance folks need to be on board with that. Through to the head of infrastructure, and again, these are not consistent roles for every organization, but they're a good indicative direction. Whoever has been running the infrastructure, she or he needs to be bought in to where we're going. And again, the head of delivery or a comparable role. Now, best practice often says, from my own personal experience and with organizations I work with, that a cloud center of excellence is incredibly important. I'm going to cover it on the next slide, but having the CCOE leader, part of this steering group, can be very empowering for the executive committee to understand those steps we're taking technically and with our people and with our processes to get the most out of cloud. And if you're a highly regulated business, bringing your risk and audit leaders on board and making them part of this journey is crucial for their understanding. And of course, HR. We're going to be upskilling people to get the very best out of AWS. So bringing together this steering group, really important. And it works best when it's around about 6 to 12. This is obviously a two-pizza model. This is an Amazonian representation, of course. Two pizza teams being, of course, that you can feed this team of moderately hungry people with 2 pizzas. And then, of course, this team best meets once a week, ideally twice a week, to remove blockers, to understand how we're going to migrating, to set ambitious goals, to remove any blockers that might occur. And I guarantee at this point, when you bring this group together for the first time, they will have a ton of questions about the migration, about cloud, about best practice. And time again, we see that when this executive steering group can come to AWS, ideally in Seattle, but we can also do EBCs locally, they can get these questions answered and move forward with a lot of pace. And the next thing we see happening time and time again from both my personal experience and from customers around the world is putting together a cloud center of excellence team. Works incredibly effectively. And the best team composition is where you have infrastructure engineers, security engineers, application engineers, operations engineers, and architects coming together with a CCOE leader to define those security objectives, those availability objectives, reliability objectives, compliance objectives, and getting that first workload, if you're not already using AWS, into the cloud. Now, it used to be that the first thing this team would do was create a landing zone and figure out all the different components, all the different building blocks, and that would take time. In my own experience, it did take time. We learned things, we changed them again as we learned new things, and this was taking too long, as Andy talked about this morning in the keynote. And since June this year, working with your solutions architect or ProServe, we can actually provide this landing zone, this best practice for you in code form. So what you get with the AWS landing zone? Well, you get a well-thought-through account management proposal. You get this identity and access management core. You get this security and governance. And of course, you get this extensibility. So we know that the platform is very, very configurable. And we've also had customers approach us saying, actually, we know there are so many different things we can configure. We don't want to spend a lot of time figuring that out for us. Help us. So we've developed this as best practice. Now, obviously, this morning, we launched Control Tower, which you can apply to be into preview for. And when that releases to GA, this will be an evolution and a step change forward in this ability. But when you take this new landing zone code, you can actually get to a point now where it's like an account vending machine. So you can take the service catalog, which obviously you can define which of the building blocks you want to use. You can take organizations, and then you can create these accounts in a very repeatable way. So you can do this right now. Now, when you've got your landing zone set up, when your questions have been answered, what's the next best step that we see? And the next best step is trying to break down that almost, sometimes a little bit overwhelming of what have I got, how can I move it? And we see this best being done in probably two phases. One is discovery, really understanding what you've got. And I'm yet to meet an organization who has a 100% accurate configuration management database. And the next is to look at what are the right application migration strategies you can actually use. So I'm going to cover discovery first of all. So with discovery, you can actually use the AWS Application Discovery Service. Now this has two modes. If you have VMware 5.5, 6, or 6.5, you can actually use this in agentless mode. If you've got physically installed operating systems, we have agents for those operating systems mentioned and shown on the slide. AWS Application Discovery Service will then take this data, put it into CSV format, encrypt it, and place it onto Amazon S3. Then using Athena, you can then query this data. This query data, the CSV format data, is also readable by the Migration Hub. This is the point that can provide you that consistent look of here's all the data that it's got, here's these key performance indicators that you need to track for your migrations. This is the work to do. Very often we see having the right KPIs for migration for the executive steering group to show that tangible progress is incredibly important. So here's how you can discover really effectively. Now let's move on to the application migration strategies. So we used to talk this with a framework of what we call 6 Rs, 6 different migration strategies. We now have a new 7th migration strategy, which is, of course, using VMware with Relocate. So let's take a look at this. If you're running vSphere 6 or 6.5, you can use cold migration or hybrid link mode to actually take your instances and actually move them into AWS. In these 5 regions is where we have the current functionality. And in VMworld on September the 4th this year, we also announced the planned rollout of the next regions where this feature will be available. So that's Relocate. What about the next one? So this is rehost. This is where you're actually going to take the existing server operating system that's running the application, and you're actually going to move it off its existing hypervisor and put it on top of EC2. Now, there are a lot of tools available to do this. I'd also suggest that you actually do it manually to understand what is happening in this process the first time, so you can clearly see how this is happening, what is going on. So let's take just a quick double click into rehosting. So we've got our instances. In this case, we can use the AWS Server Migration Service to now create AMIs into our region. And again, the Migration Hub is there. It works with the Migration Hub. You can also use a number of partner tools from the marketplace, here with Cloud Endure, ATA Data, River Meadow, offering different features and different elements of which you can do for this. Now, as of the 19th of November, you can now rehost and integrate with the key management server to create encrypted AMIs for the application migration service. So we're getting updates, of course, and we're iterating on this all the time from customer feedback. And actually, I'm pleased to announce that recently, through codified moves, we've had over 750,000 servers migrated this way. So that's rehosting. What about replatforming? What is replatforming? Well, replatforming is where you take the existing application or database and move it. So, for example, you could take Oracle WebLogic, move it to Apache Tomcat. You could take your existing database and move it to DynamoDB. This is replatforming. So let's take a double click at that. So this is where you take your application, you'll create a golden AMI at the target version that you require. And best practice says keep this simple. If you're running on Red Hat version X, create that version X also over here. You're going to reduce potential kernel incompatibilities. And then you can move your application. Again, you can then take opportunities to maybe use OpsWorks to create that golden AMI in a consistent way. You could take that application, codify its install with OpsWorks. So we see this as a very popular choice. What about databases? Here we have the database migration service. So again, you can have your database types on the left-hand side here. You can then use the DMS service to create multiple different types of target for your database. And obviously, some of these databases are extremely big, and you don't want to be saturating your Direct Connect link or your VPN link when you do this. So the ability to integrate with Snowball Edge and the DMS service to actually put your data store in an encrypted format, there are no keys kept on this, have this shipped into a region and work in conjunction with the database migration service is an incredibly useful service. And as of July the 4th this year, we've migrated over 80,000 databases in this way with our customers. Now, just as a snapshot, certainly when I was a customer in the audience, a couple of things going through my mind was, well, what are the sources for the database migration service? So I just want to put this on the screen for you, because I know some of you are thinking, well, will that work with what I've got? So these are the sources right now. This is changing continually as we, again, iterate and improve things. So these are the sources, and these are the targets. And just in the last few weeks, the Elasticsearch service was added as a target for the database migration service. What about when you've got to check the application compatibility of database code objects, including views, maybe stored procedures, functions to format, are they compatible with the target database? Now for this, we have the Schema Conversion tool. So the Schema Conversion tool runs actually on a desktop host. It supports 4 operating systems. And in this regard, you can actually use the Schema Conversion tool to look at your source databases and use it to convert the schema. And it can identify where it can't do this automatically for you as well. So where it can, it'll do it, and where it can't, it'll show it for you. So using the database migration server and the Schema Conversion tool together, you can effectively re-platform your databases. What about repurchasing? So, personally from my own journey and working with customers, very often the conversation with the leaders and the engineers and the developers is, what do you really want to be focusing on supporting? What is going to truly differentiate your business? Where do you want to spend that precious engineer and developer resource innovating for your customers? Because if you're hosting systems which are not core for your business and you're maintaining AMIs and software from your vendors, I think you've got to ask yourself why. So when you're going through this, really look at the repurchasing angle. Is it right to actually look at the marketplace and say, what can we get from the AWS marketplace to really remove that undifferentiated heavy lifting, whether it be for software as a service, or where we can take an AMI straight from an independent software vendor to remove the heavy lifting of us even having to maintain that operating system or the application installed on the Amazon machine image. So obviously for here we have the marketplace, and we've got 1,400 independent software vendors, well over 1,400 now, with 4,200 product listings. We have over 190,000 customers using the marketplace in this regard. So again, as you go through your application catalog, Being able to almost go, actually, this isn't core to our business. We are going to move this to a repurchasing model is incredibly useful. And actually, these are the most popular categories most often provisioned that we see from the marketplace. A really diverse offering here. Refactoring. What is refactoring? Very often the conversation I have with teams around the world easily strays into that of DevOps. I would like DevOps teams. I would like all my applications to be microservices. I'd like to have DevOps teams across the board. So am I going to refactor my applications to be cloud native, to look at using Lambda, to look at using DynamoDB, to really remove the maximum amount of undifferentiated heavy lifting? And obviously, when you move up the stack, as it were, you get to the very best price point, the very best efficiency, so there's a lot of attraction. But when you're migrating, keeping momentum in place is incredibly important. So my advice here is be really mindful about when you want to use refactoring in a migration. Now, if you've got some of these older non-x86 systems, obviously putting teams together to tackle and move to native cloud services can be an extremely effective way of actually moving these older incumbent systems out of your data centers. But be mindful about it. If it's a core thing to your business and you want to move to a DevOps, you want to get to those upper-level services, by all means, put the engineering effort into refactoring. And obviously, for cloud first, for cloud native, for what you're building new, you can embrace these new ways straight away. But for migrations, be mindful. I guarantee as engineers and developers, by the way, it's what you want to do by default. But you need to use all of these different R's in combination for an effective migration. And then, of course, what about retain or move? What is that? Well, we do see some customers that want to rapidly move out of their data centers on incredibly aggressive timescales. So for that, we see some customers actually picking up these systems and moving them into direct connect partners or to colos, where they can get really low latency for those systems to still have access into the regions. So we also see this coming along as an attractive option. And of course, retire, decommission. If it's not core to your business, if it's maybe an application which supports maybe monitoring in your existing data center, and you'll be amazed how many you find, of course you can label this with the retire or decommission label. So using all of these 7 R's can be an incredibly clear way to actually label what you want to do. And I actually spend a lot of my time going into customers when they seem almost overwhelmed by the migration possibility and actually getting just 7 sticky notes, 7 different colored sticky notes, going through their applications in 2 days and just literally writing the name of an application on a timeline and just almost getting a bit of a straw man going of, actually, how do you want to migrate these? It's never going to be 100% accurate. But it actually gives them a really good straw man of, actually, I can see some linkage here. I can see if I move this group of applications, I can avoid a big CapEx investment, which I had brewing here. So actually, I'm going to prioritize those first. It can really help with your detailed business case. And then, of course, moving vast amounts of data, we have Snowball in 2 different varieties. And we also have Snowmobile with optional armed guard, if you so choose. Again, this is securely held in encrypted format. There are no keys held on these devices. And this is giving you a chain of custody of the data into the region. And Snowballs have actually now traveled the equivalent of 500 times around the planet. So I get asked very often, what sort of mix should I use when I'm doing a migration? And there is no hard and fast rule for this. The answer is, you've got to look at the practicalities of each one of these options and what's right for you. But we typically see this being a pretty good guide. And notice that rehost and replatform works pretty effectively when you're looking at 70% here. Now, I guarantee as engineers and developers who love technology, there's a real propensity to want to go and choose re-architecting or replatforming. But really, again, for that speed of migration, when we saw the tools available for rehosting, actually, rehosting gives you the best speed. So here, it's rightly indexed higher. So use all of them, but be aware of some of the natural tendency to want to build almost this crystal palace of code perfection as you go on. When you're migrating, momentum's incredibly important. Tracking your progress, incredibly important into cloud. And typically, we see this coming through. Don't let perfect be the enemy of good enough. So what does good enough mean? Well, I'd say as a minimum, your security objectives, of course, need to be appropriately defined, your availability objectives. But actually, you can spend a lot of time tweaking things when you migrate, when your goal is to migrate at pace. So an interesting example from Edmunds.com, who completed their all-in migration a few years ago, when they were working with their teams and putting together what is the minimum viable refactoring to actually get applications into the cloud, they came up with a really interesting 2-week rule, which basically said, we're going to re-platform you, and if we can't do it in 2 weeks, we're actually going to rehost you. You'd be amazed at what just setting a deadline like that as you go through, what that can drive, what a team who's doing that minimum viable refactoring learns that's required for these applications, for the operating system, as they move them into cloud. Again, you get that momentum, you get that pace, you get those learnings coming through, and you can go really quickly. With that, I'd now like to hand over to Mike.
Thanks, John. Nice job.
Thanks, man.
Hello, I'm Mike Witek. I run global infrastructure for Nike. And as John said, we're going to talk about our cloud journey, which started slowly and then has gained a lot of momentum in the last 18 months. But before we do that, I want to share a little corporate strategy with you. So you got some context for why and how we're using these technologies. Our mission statement is to bring innovation and inspiration to every athlete in the world. And there's an asterisk next to the word athlete to refer to a quote from one of our co-founders, Bill Bowerman, that if you have a body, you are an athlete. So we are here to serve the entire population, to allow them to engage with sport and be more athletic. And that athlete asterisk has increasing demands and expectations for how they interact with our brand and how we connect with them. And we do a lot of that through our mobile apps, like Sneakers and the Nike app, Nike Run Club, and Nike Training Club. And on the off chance that you don't have those apps on your phone right now, this would be a great time to download and install them. And those apps provide a good insight into the way that we started using cloud technology. We launch new products every day. And some of those products, especially with our Jordan brand, generate a little more attention than others. And the biggest of those product launches happen during this time of the year. And what we used to do is look at the biggest launch that we had from the previous year and add capacity in our data center to handle that traffic. And for the majority of the year, it would sit there just looking at us and not doing very much at all. And we had a real issue with being able to scale out to meet the demand that we generate and that people have for our products. So what the Sneakers app was originally there to do was to have that elastic ability to really go out wide before our launches and then shrink back down when they were done. To do that, we also wanted to make certain that we were only writing the stuff that we needed to write the functionality in the app itself, not all the other components that are necessary to sell product and then to ship it to you. So getting to the point where we had direct connects in our data centers, and really there are now network hubs, not necessarily data centers, that allowed us to take all of our existing applications, and many of them are the large third-party applications that I'm sure you folks run as well, and turn them into endpoints. And we can take the Sneakers app and put it directly into AWS, and then it can talk back to our order management system and all the other things that are in the flow as endpoints without having to rewrite all that stuff, because not all of it needs to scale out the same way. So that direct connect was a huge success for us, and we've now got them in US West 2, in East 1, in Dublin, in Frankfurt, in Singapore, in Beijing, and we'll go live with Tokyo in January. And having that infrastructure there and that connectivity there then allows us to leverage all of those regions as and when we need to. John also talked about the importance of sponsorship from the highest levels of your company. And that has been a huge part of our success. So our CEO, Mark Parker, announced a triple-double strategy, which is laid out here. And that is 2 times innovation with our ability to come up with new product that we are then getting into the marketplace very quickly. And so that speaks to the product design applications that we have. 2 times speed, which takes a normal product life cycle from the time that you finalize a design until it's available in the market, from 18 months down to much smaller than that. And 2 times direct, the ability for us to engage with our consumers where they are, in things like the Sneakers app and the Nike app. And he has been very specific in each one of our quarterly earnings calls and with our entire company, how critical technology is and our digital transformation is to this triple-double strategy. And as we talk about scale, I just want to give you some numbers from our fiscal year that ended in May. Our fiscal year runs from June 1st to May 31st. So these are the numbers from FY18. Just to give you a sense of the number of products that we're dealing with, the number of locations, whether they are factories or logistics centers or our retail stores. And another statement that came from our CIO that was hugely helpful was to say that we were going to move not just cloud-native workloads that we were rewriting ourselves into the cloud, and more specifically, when any hardware is fully depreciated, that hardware refresh will not be new cardboard boxes full of equipment, but rather we will redeploy these applications into the cloud. And that confused some of us at first because we're not talking about very cloud-native apps, and we had to come up with a process to do it. And the way that it started was to understand the way these applications talk to each other. Look at the network traffic and know which apps need to be within 20 milliseconds of each other, which need to be within 100 milliseconds. And then from that, we got a sense of which apps needed to move together and how we could leverage those direct connects to make certain that we could move them successfully. And we also had to look at the storage that was required. A lot of these applications use NFS to talk to each other and to talk to themselves. And understanding those IOPS requirements through the EFS service that we use in each of these regions was also key to our success. And the first time we did it, with the first of these migrations, it was a bit scary because not only are these really important applications for our business, but these are apps that have production instances. They have DR instances. They have 5 or 6 or sometimes more development instances. So we're talking about a big move. But to trust that process with the first successful migration, and then the second, and then the 5th, and then the 10th, got to the point where now we know the process that we need to use by looking at the data of how these apps talk to each other, understanding the compute and storage and networking requirements that they have, and then making certain that we have the ability to redeploy them. And now we are seeing huge benefits from doing this. One of our other strategies is what we call our key cities. So we believe that over the next 5 years, 80% of our growth will come from 12 key cities. And due to the fact that some companies maybe set difficult expectations about how quickly things can be delivered, and maybe people have an expectation about how quickly things can be delivered now, we have to get to the point where our supply chain is present in all 12 of those key cities. Because we host our warehouse management system in AWS, that allows us to more quickly deploy that technology to improve our supply chain speed in those 12 cities without having to order hardware. And the other thing that's happened just over the last week is when we hit peak times of the year, unexpected things happen. When you get to the edge and you see new traffic volumes, the bottleneck can shift a little bit. And having AWS there so we can quickly add capacity or adjust it to these applications that, again, at first we didn't really expect it would be the ones that we'd hosted on that platform, has been instrumental. It has been fantastic because we can respond quickly and we know exactly what we need and how quickly we can get that additional capacity provisioned. So I'd say getting to that point where you have that senior leadership and that stakeholder support established, that's important. Pay attention to network proximity, leverage those direct connects, understand the way your applications talk to each other, and that will guide the way for which need to move together and which can move at a later date. And don't forget about the importance of storage and making certain that you've got the IOPS that your applications need when you can drop them down. That's been hugely successful for us, and I hope it'll be successful for you too. Thanks very much.
Well, thank you, Mike. That was an awesome story. It's always great to hear from our customers and just see how they're able to take advantage of some of the benefits that AWS provides. Hi, everyone. My name is Joe Chung. Like John, I'm also an enterprise strategist. I spend time talking to senior executives, but I also spend time with our business development teams thinking about ways that we can help accelerate the cloud journey. And one of those ways is through our migration acceleration program, of which I've had the pleasure of being able to support and participate in. So what I'd like to do to close today's presentation is to talk about how AWS is providing prescriptive guidance to you as customers to help with this migration journey and take some of the best practices that John has shared about, and as well as Mike, and package that up. Before joining AWS, I was the Chief Architect and Group Technology Officer for Accenture IT. And one of the things that's really important, just to reinforce again some of the things that John and Mike said, is to have a really ambitious goal. We had a goal to be 90% in the cloud in 3 years. I'm happy to report that my alma mater has actually exceeded that. And the reason why we did that is around innovation. It was part of our digital transformation journey. John shared a number of different outcomes, but they generally kind of resolve to kind of these 3 areas. And I think it's really important as you're starting to socialize this journey, because the move to cloud is just as much a people and cultural transformation as it is a technical one. Innovation is simply, to me, moving from idea and opportunity to delivering customer value. And those companies that have the ability to do that more quickly and at scale generally are the ones who are going to be perceived to be more innovative. And certainly moving to the cloud does that. The other aspect is being able to retire technical debt. Analysts say that 60 to 70% of IT budgets is spent on just keeping the lights on. And even then, it seems like the lights aren't always staying on, they're actually flickering. And while the term retiring technical debt may rub some of you the wrong way, particularly maybe some of you coders out there, we do tend to use this term a little broadly. And I do think there's an amazing way that moving to the cloud can help retire technical debt. And then finally, talking about reliability. It's unfortunate. I've had too many conversations with CTOs who've had really bad experiences, data center outages. And as digital services become so core and central to the way business is conducted, these things get the attention of boards and CEOs. These are not just things that get hidden. I was speaking with the infrastructure lead of a retail organization. They had a hard down in their data center, and they were still recovering several weeks out. And while at AWS we say that everything will fail, and that's like what Werner Vogels, our CTO, likes to say, the way that you can recover from those failures is dramatically different. And there are ways that we can leverage our availability designs in our infrastructure that can help alleviate a lot of these concerns. And with the rise of natural disasters, and certainly in the US, in the Southwest and the East Coast, we've had many conversations with customers who are getting really nervous, particularly if their backup data centers are just a few kilometers away. So what AWS has done is we've tried to package all of our learnings from thousands of customers who are migrating, hundreds of data center scale migrations, and pull together what analysts are telling us is the industry's most comprehensive migration program. It starts with the methodology, packaging up all of these learnings, investing and working with the ISV ecosystem, as well as some of our own tooling, working with partners that we've vetted and actually shared these methodologies with, to our own professional services organizations who can act as on-the-ground experts to help guide you, to training, which is what I can't overemphasize, of being able to enable your organization to be able to do these types of migrations. And in certain cases, you, as customers, may qualify for investments to help take care of the migration bubble that often arises as you instantiate your infrastructure in the cloud. So we'll go into these into a little bit more detail. So how does it start? We typically like to start with an assessment. John mentioned some of the discovery that you might do in your infrastructure. We also like to start with what we call a migration readiness assessment, which we'll cover in a few slides, as well as starting to get a picture of what the high-level opportunity is. Usually people start to kind of peel back the covers, start to replace some of the assumptions with their own data. because we have a number of tools where we can do sort of a back-of-the-napkin analysis of the size of opportunity. But of course, everybody wants to replace it with their data. And that's when you start to create a more detailed business case, being able to take advantage of levers of the storage savings opportunities, which a lot of people don't realize is actually one of the primary levers in which you can save on infrastructure cost. And then what we like to do, because we understand that this is a set of capabilities that many organizations have to deploy, which we've organized across these different work streams in investing in the people, investing in the operations, because it will require a new or different operating model in the cloud, to revisiting your security policies. Oftentimes, there's a pretty dramatic impedance mismatch with existing security policies, and making sure that you tackle those things head on is really important, to establishing the sort of the muscle to be able to manage this journey and to create that roadmap. So what we've done is we've got sort of a standard playbook that we can deploy into your organizations and work with the cloud COE to start executing and instantiating this capability. The other part is just to make sure that you're breaking this up into logical waves. Some people do it by business unit, others do it by data center, and you can kind of rinse and repeat. We work with some customers that operate as large conglomerates, and you may find that it's kind of a distributed process, which is great, and we have the ability to support and tailor that. Let's go a little bit into the business case. Now, when we used to talk about migrations, a lot of customers would tell us, you're over-indexing on cost. What about some of these other dimensions that are important as part of the migration process? And while cost savings is one of the levers, and it's not uncommon for us to see 30% on average savings when you take into account the migration cost, there are these other dimensions around staff productivity and operational resilience and business agility. I'll share one of my own examples to augment some of the examples that you see on the board, is when we moved to the cloud and we did a massive lift and shift with the workloads from my old organization, we saw a 30% drop in incidents, just like for like. It was the same application, the same database, and we simply moved it into AWS, a 30% reduction. We've seen other organizations that see close to 100% reduction just because of the resilience and the architecture and the design that you get with AWS. And it's no surprise to me because I saw some pictures of our facility, and it was not as nice and neat as what it probably could have been. And then certainly talking about business agility. It's really hard, and I'm sure all of you guys would agree, to drive agendas strictly from a technology perspective. They have to align to the business unit. And making sure that your business stakeholders are on board, and that at the end, it's not about serving IT's interests, it's about serving the business's interests and being able to deliver customer value much more quickly and being able to have these types of digital experiences that are always on, highly available, and extremely performant. I mentioned the migration readiness assessment. It's actually a piece of work that I originally contributed to as we were trying to mature our migration acceleration program, which is, this is our third year in which we've been, had a formalized program. And what it is it's about a one-day workshop where AWS or partners will facilitate a conversation with the leadership team in your organization, ideally your CIO and CTO and their direct reports. And what we do is we walk through AWS's Cloud Adoption Framework, which is simply an organizing framework that talks about not just the technical pieces of the platform, operations, and security, but talking about some of the things that are challenging from a governance perspective, a business perspective, a people perspective. And what we do is we have a dialogue to kind of uncover some of the capabilities and really highlight some of the gaps and potential inconsistencies of being able to execute a large-scale migration. And what we do is we do a readout. I've done many of these. I know John has done as well. And we give a kind of a readout, a scorecard. And while some of my colleagues have told me, hey, does it really have to be red, yellow, green, because people have this like aversion to red, we pretty much kind of said, no, it's good. We want people to have sort of that reaction of, hey, let's go close these gaps. And what essentially we do is, if you look at the previous slide, is we shoot those gaps and say, okay, we want to give you credit for areas that you might have already invested in. We also want to obviously help you close those gaps across these different dimensions and areas. And it's a great actual change management mechanism as well as you socialize the scorecard across your organization of things that you need to do. Now, one of the things that has happened as we've tried to socialize this, and we've worked with lots of companies, is they said, that migration methodology is great, but man, it seems like if we don't have the capabilities and we're not that mature, it's going to take a lot of time to put in all of those piece components that you say that we need. Wouldn't it be great to do something a lot quicker? And so what we've done, based on some of the work that leading organizations like GE has done, is ProgramaTies what we call the 50 and 50. 50 applications migrated to the cloud in 50 days. And what I love about this is that it sets a pretty ambitious goal. It's not like a sandbagging type of exercise. And it really can show the organization, hey, we can do this. Because unfortunately, I've spoken to far too many organizations who get stalled in their migration journey. They talk about cloud first. They have said they're going to do these things. And at the end of the day, there's just not that much that is migrated. And the way that we can kind of do this is, one, being able to really quickly create that landing zone, or as I like to call the virtual data center. That is a non-trivial piece of work that we've now systematized and programatized so that we can deploy that very quickly. It's going to be secure, operable, and safe. But the second linchpin in being able to do this quickly is to be able to leverage Amazon Managed Services. So it is not an MSP in your traditional sense. Essentially what Amazon has done is said, hey, how can we take care of some of the heavy lifting on the lower ends of the operational stack, logging, monitoring, and patching, but do that in a modern, automated way, and do that for customers. And so what it essentially allows organizations to do is to quickly bootstrap their migration journey. It's not a one-way door, and in Amazon, we like to talk about one-way and two-way doors in our decision-making process. Any two-way door, you should be able to execute, because if it doesn't work out, you can just back out of. And that's the way that we've designed AMS. Think of it potentially as a sort of training wheels to say, hey, we'd love to understand how to be able to run a modern cloud operating model. And if I want, I can take it back. And if I say, that's awesome, I can keep going. And we've even seen some organizations say, you know what, maybe my traditional workloads I'll run in AMS. All of my net new stuff I'll run in my own kind of captive set of accounts with my own operating team. It's a powerful change management mechanism when it's executed. And for those of you who are feeling stuck, I would highly recommend talking to our AWS teams, and we can give you a lot more detail on how to execute this kind of exercise and a playbook and really potentially bootstrap and get the migration journey going in your organization. We have tools. We've partnered closely with the ISV ecosystem. John has already covered a number of these at the top, so I won't go into too many of these in detail. But as you can see, across every step of the way, we've worked closely with these ISVs to help you, whether it's helping to understand that inventory. Very few people are willing to bet their careers on the accuracy of their CMDB, to helping to generate a business case. A company like TSO Logic, who I'll just kind of call out, will not only take that data and sort of help you do the dispositioning, but actually, based on your enterprise agreement, actually make recommendations for the right instance size, which can really accelerate and add to the business case. To a number of other tools that I won't go into too much detail on. And the other thing that we've done is, in partnering with these ISVs, we've made it really easy for our customers to provision these tools. And in some cases, have pre-negotiated the licensing and the fees, and making that a really seamless process from a procurement perspective. I'll close with talking about our partners. I know a lot of organizations say that the biggest issue that they have with being able to move to the cloud is having this lack of talent. And we've invested heavily and worked closely with all the partners. This list continues to grow. And we, as I mentioned before, share every aspect of the methodology. We're not here to try to keep this to ourselves and just benefit our professional services organization, but to help all of our partners in being able to help you as customers migrate. So whether it's helping to instantiate your cloud COE or helping to with the migration factory. Some people say, you know what, I'm not interested in moving my stuff. It's something that's going to happen once, and so building some muscle around that is not super interesting to me. Or perhaps it's with helping you do it yourself. The nice thing that I like about this list is that it's not just the largest SIs in the world that we've partnered with, but many boutique companies like Flux7, as an example, who really specialize in a DevOps-oriented migration path. So with that, I'd like to thank you for your time. Really appreciate the investment. With the time that we have remaining, and if for those of you that want to stick around, we'd love to take some of your questions. So what I'd like to ask you to do is walk up to the mic that's on this side of the room, and then John, myself, and Mike would love to answer some of your questions. But enjoy the rest of your day, and have a great reInvent. Thank you very much.
Or they can come.
Nice job, man.
Oh, thank you.
Shoot.
From the question?
The migration acceleration program was doing you guys a service.
No, I think some people are going to wake up. I see some people still staying, if you don't mind. Yeah, just.
You know, for all the applications to move to. So just
And if everyone walks out, then we'll just move to the side.
The initial part of that
So
migration.
I heard that you do the 50-day, 50
Typically, I don't
apps
see people
migration.
staying.
We did hear from, and by the way, I'm from Cummins.
No.
Oh,
Diesel
okay.
manufacturers, okay. And believe we are working with Chun from Amazon. We had seen some of these things that you're shown today. But the question that I have for you folks is this, right? In a truest sense, right, most of these companies that are adopting the journey of cloud truly do not have these cloud center of excellence, okay? And we are one, we're just getting into that. So that is a big showstopper, right? Number two is, and again, Cummins is a 100-year-old company, so we are turning 100 next year. So the number of applications and technologies that we have are pretty spread out, 600 plus technologies. And so the question that you had shown about the identification and having an application details sought out, it's not going to happen in the time frame that you're really showing out there.
Yeah.
So any thoughts, any things from your other experiences, please?
Yeah, so I think there's two questions there. There was a question around, what do I do if I don't have a COE? And then there's a second question of like, if I've got this really complex landscape of applications, in a 50 and 50 context, how do you identify what those applications are? Great questions. So first of all, our ProServe and our partners do have capabilities and best practices to help you stand up that center of excellence. I truly believe it's really hard to make that journey without having somebody who's a leader and having people whose full-time job it is to doing the cloud work. You know, one of the first litmus tests that I ask of, you know, when people are saying our cloud journey's not going well, is I ask, what's your team look like? And when I hear that it's like 50% of Joe's time and 10% of John's time and 5% of Mike's time, you can guarantee things are not going to move very fast, because essentially it means that cloud is a hobby project. And I don't know about you, I love to play golf and play music, but it's like the last thing on my list, right? So to make kind of, one of the terms I say is go professional. Just go all in and make sure you dedicate the resources to go do that, and we can help you with that. The second question is around how do you disposition these applications? There are a couple different heuristics or rules that you can use. You know, in some of, and by the way, the companies that have executed some of these 50 and 50 migrations are some of the oldest and most kind of like gnarliest enterprise companies that I've ever met. And you can go as simple as, let's take some kind of non-critical workloads, use some of the dependency understanding to say, hey, maybe some of those workloads that stand alone. So one option is to kind of cherry pick the easiest stuff. I've also seen some people say, you know what, let's not just cherry pick, let's do a couple of really critical ones, because that will really send the signal to the organization. So happy to double click that with you, but that's kind of the approach that I've seen people take, yeah. Other questions?
Yeah, where can we get these slides?
Where do you get these slides?
So these slides will be on the app. The reInvent app available as a URL afterwards, after the session. So
yeah,
within 24 hours.
And all of the sessions are will be posted to YouTube.
YouTube, yeah.
For your own consumption, and so you'll be able to share this with you.
Yeah, there'll be a URL link for the slideware as well.
There's a question back here. Sure.
Hey, Chris. Well, yes, we did. And I think also initially we probably didn't prioritize that as much as we should have, and particularly with some very large third-party applications that are specific to our supply chain that use NFS to talk to other apps, and also stuff like printing shipping labels, for example. That is a big file system with lots and lots and lots of files as images in it, and when that slowed down to the point where we weren't able to potentially print labels as quickly as we needed to, we felt that immediately. And so particularly as you get to peak seasons like this one, and those volumes really go up, that's a thing that if we don't have our math right about provisioning enough capacity, specifically with IOPS, then the apps just don't work. And so once we got to the point where we knew to prioritize that, and we had formulas that we could be confident in because that led to the right number of IOPS provisioned, then it's a thing that we always check for, but we're not nearly as concerned about because it's just part of the discipline. Thanks for the question.
Hi, my name is Cozy Joseph. I'm with Nexstar Energy in Florida. My question is for Mike. I'm curious to know how large was your team? Did you have a big migration team? And also, how much ProServe did you have to do, if any? How much ProServe did you have to do from AWS to be successful?
Sure. Thanks for the question. Initially, we had a lot of help from AWS. And some of it was just to understand how we could get our networking set the right way, particularly when we were setting up those direct connects. So we'd have internally routable address space that would be present in the VPCs that would then have to talk back to the applications that we still had on-prem. Getting that going initially, we needed a lot of help. And I think probably one of the biggest mistakes that I made early on was not recognizing how much our cloud journey would put a strain on our networking team, and how much you need more capacity in the traditional networking sense in order to not only maintain the pace, but then also to do the investigation, to understand how the apps talk to each other, to make certain that we were moving them correctly, just to maintain the infrastructure that we've built. So our team is a follow-the-sun team. We've got, my team in total is about 480 people, and we've got folks in Portland, in Amsterdam, and in Shanghai. And those are kind of beautifully spaced about 9 hours apart, so we can pass off between the teams. But it took us a while to build up the core set of capabilities in each of those teams. So now we're at the point where we can just move that work across all three. 400? Yeah, that's right. 400, about 480. Yep.
So one of the things I'll share is that we do see a life cycle to these Cloud Center of Excellences, and we have more detailed guidance. But what I would say is, for example, the peak of our cloud team, including doing some of the migration factory work, was around 30 to 40 people. But what we typically ask is to start with a Tiger team, some SWAT team that's dedicated, that has some of the personas that John had mentioned earlier, use that as the acting fulcrum. And then as you start to grow your cloud capabilities and your journeys, you'll start to see kind of the specialization. Maybe some people focused on migration, some people focused on the quote-unquote cloud platform engineering, being able to do the design of the infrastructure, and maybe even going so far as being able to provide templates of application architectures, particularly if there are new architecture patterns, to having a cloud business office that can focus on things like cost management, optimization. And so there's a number of these kind of functional areas. And then usually what happens over time, and what normally happens is you end up seeing sort of resources transfer more and more into the cloud center of excellence, and kind of absorbing other functions within the enterprise, if that makes sense.
But the COE is an ephemeral construct, really. I mean, on my own journey, when we got to a certain timeline, the actual CCOE team, I split them in half, brought more people in to reskill, and over time, cloud first, cloud native, having more teams and skills to be able to migrate apps actually unlocks and scales it. And I think you end, with that cloud operating model on Joe's slide, you might end up with just a small cloud ops team that's defining maybe gold AMIs, maybe continuing to tweak some of the guardrails as you scale out and your teams are far more capable to just build and maintain what they need to on cloud. I think we've got time for one more.
Yep.
Mike, I'm going to tag on to the IOPS question that we had. So you planned for the IOPS, you learned in your migration that you needed more IOPS for the seasonability or whatever that is, right? So at this point, do you have fixed IOPS for your peak season and that's what you're running at? I look at IOPS as a capacity. It's like storage, like CPU, right? I may need more when I have more traffic going through. I'm from the financial industry and we run like month ends, quarter ends, there's like peak loads around that.
Sure.
So if I needed more IOPS, I could pay for that and then I just go back to my normal usage and reduce IOPS and not have to pay for the peak IOPS? Or how are you managing that?
Yeah, EFS is a little tricky. And I would definitely say that's where we also got a lot of help initially. Because there's different levels that you can buy. Sometimes the amount of IOPS that you receive are based on the amount of capacity that you're using. So it takes a little bit to get that tuned correctly. But it's been such a critical element of the success of our migration. And now it's the point where we're looking at it all the time, particularly during these peak periods of the year. And it's one of the key parts of our monitoring is just to make certain that we're not running out of gas at that layer. But I would definitely recommend speaking to AWS, getting some expertise from them on how to get EFS configured, because it is a little tricky.
And what I'll close with is that some people think the traditional infrastructure roles are going to disappear, right? The people who are used to racking and stacking servers, managing EMC storage arrays, and doing fiber channel and all that kind of business, that's gone. And I think that's the furthest thing from the truth, because there's still storage in the cloud. It's just different, and the way that you provision it is different. But there's got to be somebody in the organization who has to understand the underlying characteristics, because no offense to the app folks out there, but they generally don't think too much about this stuff. And so having your resources learn and skill up on these kinds of concerns, I think is really important. Same goes for networking, same goes for servers. The list goes on and on and on. So I would highly encourage how you can leverage some of the resources you have in your organization to learn these kinds of characteristics.
So we'll be able to look at IOPS if we migrated there.
Sorry.
So we'll be able to look at the IOPS if we migrated to AWS, like the utilization around IOPS.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
I'm talking about the HPC kind of workload that we run, and we run into these kind of issues all the time around IOPS.
Well, it's just about mapping to what the workload needs, and just looking at the storage that's provisioned, how many NFS mounts it has, how hot those things run when the app is going through its cycles, and being from financial services, you said month end, quarter end.
Yep.
Take a look at those peaks, and the apps will tell you. You just got to look.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
For sure.
Cool.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.